Hi again, my sweets. I am back with part 2 of chapter 21, The Plan. We left off with the army man and the military men, along with Sophie and the BFG, seeing the giants sleeping. Let's continue. Even at a distance, they were enough to scare the daylights out of the soldiers. But when they got close and saw what the giants really looked like, they began to sweat with fear. 9 fearsome, ugly, half-naked, 50-feet-long brutes lay sprawled over the ground in various grotesque attitudes of sleep, and the sound of their snoring was indeed like gunfire in a battle. The BFG raised a hand. The jeeps all stopped. The soldiers got out. "What happens if one of them wakes up?" whispered the head of the army, his knees knocking together from fear. If any one of them is waking up, he will gobble you down before you can say "Knack-jife," the BFG answered, grinning hugely. "Me is the only one that won't be gobbled up because giants is never eating giants. Me and Sophie is the only safe ones because I is hiding her if that happens." The head of the army took several paces to the rear. So did the head of the Air Force. They climbed up rather quickly back into their jeep, ready to make a fast getaway if necessary. "Go forward, men," the head of the army said. "Go forward and do your duty bravely." The soldiers crept forward with their ropes and chains. All of them were trembling mightily. None dared to speak a word. The BFG, with Sophie now sitting on the palm of his hand, stood nearby watching the operation. To give the soldiers their due, they were extremely courageous. There were 6 well-trained, efficient men working on each giant, and within 10 minutes, 8 out of the 9 giants had been trussed up like chickens and were still snoring contentedly. The 9th, who happened to be the flesh lump-eater, was causing trouble for the soldiers because he was lying with his right arm tucked underneath his enormous body. It was impossible to tie his wrists and arms together without first getting that arm out from underneath him. I'm going to show you a picture of the giants all sleeping and them kind of watching from afar. Those giants are big, huh? And then this is one more of how they're all sleeping. Not very attractive, for sure. Very, very cautiously, the 6 soldiers who were working on the flesh lump-eater began to pull at the huge arm, trying to release it. The flesh lump-eater opened his tiny, piggy black eyes. "Which of you foul pesters is wiggling my arm?" he bellowed. "Is that you, you rotsome man-hugger?" Suddenly, he saw the soldiers. In a flash, he was sitting up. He looked around him. He saw more soldiers. With a roar, he leapt to his feet. The soldiers, petrified with fear, froze where they were. They had no weapons with them. The head of the army put his jeep into reverse. "Human beings!" the flesh lump-eater yelled. "What is all of you flesh-bunking, rotsome, half-baked beans doing in our country?" He made a grab at a soldier and swept him up in his hand. "I is having early suppers today," he shouted, holding the poor squirming soldier at arm's length and roaring with laughter. Sophie, standing on the palm of the BFG's hand, was watching horror-struck. "Do something," she cried. "Quick, before he eats him!" "Put that human being down," the BFG shouted. The flesh lump-eater turned and stared at the BFG. "What is you doing here with all these grotty twiglets?" he bellowed. "You is making me very suspitchy." The BFG made a rush at the flesh lump-eater, but the colossal 54-foot-high giant simply knocked him over with a flick of his free arm. At the same time, Sophie fell off the BFG's palm onto the ground. Her mind was racing. She must do something. She must, she must, she must. Then she remembered the sapphire brooch the queen had pinned onto her chest. Quickly, she undid it. I is guzzling you nice and slow, the flesh lump eater was saying to the soldier in his hand. Then I is guggling 10 or 20 more of you midgy little maggots down there. You is not getting away from me because I is galloping 50 times faster than you. Sophie ran up behind the flesh lump eater. She was holding the brooch between her fingers. When she was right up close to the great naked hairy legs, she rammed the 3-inch long pin of the brooch as hard as she could into the flesh lump eater's right ankle. It went deep and into the flesh and stayed there. The giant gave a roar of pain and jumped high in the air. He dropped the soldier and made a grab for his ankle. The BFG, knowing what a coward the flesh lump eater was, saw his chance. You has been bitten by a snake, he shouted. I seed it biting you. It was a frightsome poisonous viper. It was a dreadly dangerous windscreen viper. Save our souls, bellowed the flesh lump eater. Sound the crumpets, I is bitten by a septitious venomous windscreen viper. He flopped to the ground and sat there, hobbling his head off and clutching his ankle with both hands. His fingers felt the brooch. My goodness. The teeth of the dreadly viper is still sticking in me, he yelled. I is feeling the teeth sticking into my anklet. The BFG saw his second chance. We must be getting those viper's teeth out at once, he cried. Otherwise you is deader than duck soup. I is helping you. The BFG knelt down beside the flesh lump eater. You must grab your anklet very tight with both hands, he ordered. That will stop the poisonous juices from the venomsome viper going up your leg and into your heart. The flesh lump eater grabbed his ankle with both hands. Now close your eyes and grittle your teeth and look up to heaven and say a prayer while I is taking out the teeth of the venomsome viper, the BFG said. The terrified flesh lump eater did exactly as he was told. The BFG signaled for some rope. A soldier rushed it over to him. With both the flesh lump eater's hands gripping his ankle, it was simply a matter for the BFG to tie the ankles and hands together with a tight knot. I is pulling out the frightsome viper's teeth, the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. Do it quickly, before I is pizened to death, shouted the flesh lump eater. There we is, said the BFG. You can look now. When the flesh lump eater saw that he was trussed up like a turkey, he gave a yell so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and he wriggled, he fought and he figgled, he squirmed and he squiggled. But there was not a thing he could do. You have to see this picture. Flesh lump eater. Well done, you, Sophie cried. Well done, you, said the BFG, smiling at the little girl. You is saving all of our lives. Will you please get that brooch out of the flesh lump eater's ankle? The flesh lump eater howled. The BFG wiped the pin and handed it back to Sophie. Curiously, not one of the other giants had woken up during this schmazel. When you is only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you is sleeping extra doubly deep, the BFG explained. The head of the army and the Air Force drove forward once again in their jeep. Her Majesty will be very pleased with me, the head of the army said. I shall probably get a medal. What's the next move? Now you is all driving over to my cave to load up my bottles of dreams. We can't waste time with that rubbish, said the army general. It is the Queen's order, said Sophie. She was now back on the BFG's hand. So the 9 jeeps drove across to the BFG's cave, and the great dream-loading operation began. There were 50,000 jars in all to be loaded up. more than 5,000 to each jeep, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they all came back, the BFG had a sack the size of a small house slung over his shoulder. "What's that you've got in there?" the head of the army demanded to know. "Curiosity is killing the rat," the BFG said as he turned away from the silly man. When he was sure that all his precious dreams had been safely loaded onto the jeeps, the BFG said, "Now we is driving back to the belly poppers and picking up the frightsome giants." The jeeps drove back to the helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried carefully, jar by jar, on the helicopters. The soldiers climbed back on board, but the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It was a fine sight to see them, these great air machines hovering over the trussed-up giants. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrific thundering of engines overhead. And the finest sight of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting about on the ground like a mass of mighty snakes as they tried to free themselves from the ropes and chains. I'll show you the picture, and then I'll let you know what they're all shouting. Unfortunate. "I is flush-bunkled," roared the flesh lump eater. "I is spitz-wiggled," yelled the child chewer. "I is swa-galloped," bellowed the bone cruncher. "I is goose-grudgeled," howled the man-hugger. "I is guns-swiped," shouted the meat dripper. "I is flunk-gungled," screamed the maid masher. "I is slop-scroggled," squawked the gizzard gulper. "I is crod-squinkled," yowled the blood bottler. "I is bomb-muggered," screeched the butcher boy. The 9 giant carrying helicopters each chose a separate giant and hovered directly over him. Very strong steel with hooks on the ends of them were lowered from the front and the rear of each helicopter. The BFG quickly secured the hooks to the giant's chains, 1 hook near the legs and 1 hook near the arms. Then, very slowly, the giants were winched up into the air, parallel with the ground. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. Here's another picture. So if you look, there's a hook by the head and then a hook by the foot. The BFG, with Sophie once more resting comfortably in his ear, set off at a gallop for England. The helicopters all banked around and followed after him. It was an amazing spectacle, those 9 helicopters, winging through the sky, each with a trussed-up, 50-foot-long giant slung underneath it. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to get dark, the helicopters switched on powerful searchlights and trained them onto the galloping giant so as to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking. And that is the end of chapter 21. So it was roughly about 30 minutes, I was right. And like I said, I didn't want to do it all at once for you because 20 minutes isn't so bad, but 30 minutes is pretty long to listen to a chapter. So I hope you enjoyed the 2 parts of chapter 21. Chapter 22 will be up by Miss Demers on Monday. So again, this is going up Friday. Miss Demers will post on Monday. Hope you guys are doing well and that you're staying safe and that you're enjoying these chapters read by us to you guys. And we're almost done with the book. So I hope that you've read or are caught up to all of our chapters. If you're not, you can always go back and re-listen. Like I said, I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe, and social distancing from people who are not in your house. Miss Carp, out.